Welcome to SUAANGAN. I'm your host, Janine Blake. The Inuvialuit Communication Society is celebrating their 20th anniversary this season. On today's program, we'll bring you the ICS Story Part 1. We'll bring you interviews with founding members and the history of the organization. But first, we'll bring you this interview that was done with former Executive Director Greg Smith back in 1985.
Almost 10 years ago, when a group of Inuvialuit got together and decided they wanted to form a communication society, but they never managed to get funding, and so the idea sort of dropped away for another 7 or 8 years. And then when I came up to work for COPE 2.5 years ago, I found a lot of information in the files about this organization, and we called a meeting at the COPE annual general meeting to set up a new board. And that new board did the paperwork and got going, elected a president and vice president and secretary treasurer, and got the society activated. And then it took about another year before ICS got any funding.
We were coincidentally just there at the right time. The funding was announced by government, and we had a society ready to get going. And one of the first steps that we had to do was go around to all the communities in the region and find out what people wanted. We weren't sure if they wanted radio or did they want television, and they told us pretty clearly that they wanted television. So that's where ICS took off into the TV field.
The history of communications in our region goes back further than 20 years. In 1969, COPE, the Committee for Original Peoples Entitlement, recognized the need for a communications organization, and COPE Communications was born. Then it became Inuvialuit in December 1978, and in the fall of 1983, the Inuvialuit Communication Society was born. Nellie Cornier is the chair and CEO of the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation. Back in 1983, she was one of the founding members of ICS. We asked her why the original members decided that it was important for the Inuvialuit to have their own communication society.
In the very beginning days, in 1969, when COPE was formed, that was one of the initial issues that came up. How do you communicate? You know, how do you reach a lot of people? And even in those days, there was few people had telephones, really. There was a landline. There wasn't a television station, and although everyone listened to radio, there was very, very little circulation of written material or television material, period. No television at all. So given that we were going to embark on a new initiative of Aboriginal self-sufficiency through COPE, the big things, how do we communicate it, you know, and when something happens, how do you communicate? So it was really a major issue on how do you communicate. At that time, there wasn't a lot of money. At 69, 70, and 71, there wasn't any money at all. So we just, all the work that we tried to do was done basically on a volunteer basis. The organization didn't have any money. But once we had tapped into federal government money, the first amount of money was $1,500 a year to do something in communications. But by and large, a lot of the communications was done door to door and person to person, because we couldn't really rely on anything because the transmission, technical transmission facilities just weren't there. And as we moved along, we also were getting a stigma from the situation that was arising in southern Canada with the First Nations, where government was looking at the communications needs of Aboriginal groups, mainly First Nations, and to see how, you know, how that can be configured. And they didn't at that time want they wanted a separate society at that time to deal if they were going to give money, because they felt it was too tied to the Aboriginal organization. If we were in a similar situation, it probably, you know, would have been legitimate, but we really weren't. Everybody was just doing their utter best to let people know what was going on, what the new initiatives are, what the new political agenda of the Northwest Territories is, you know, along with, you know, the entire Northwest Territories, including Eastern Arctic. And there was a lot taking place, and so it was very, very difficult. Communications was always a very key role in how do you get people understanding what is going on. And like I said, we did most of that by door by door by door by door, person by person. So there was an agenda set for every 4 months where every household was reached. Then we had a team to do that. But in any event, there was really a broader need on how do people know who the Inuvialuit are. You know, and even with the Inuit in the Eastern Arctic, it was you very seldom heard anything about them on the national network. If there was any issues, it was generally First Nations AFN. So together, collectively, we really began to work together to see how we could access funding for the internal needs, the inside needs of the territory, but also externally, because we were dealing collectively in the Northwest Territories with federal agencies, you know, oil and gas industries that were coming in, but really on the Richter scale of communications or what was on television or radio was very, very limited. Yeah. And so we knew we had to do something major. And in order to do that, we formed an organization, you know, separated the organization into the very first incorporated communication society, and we were in Holman Island, or in Holman, and we were having our annual general meeting. And Sam Raddy was the president at that time, and he told Peter Green, look, we need to incorporate and have people on a body that's going to forward the communications needs of the Inuvialuit. So Sam sent Peter out in the community, took a couple of board directors, and he had his meeting. And you know, Peter Green is a very slow talker, you know, but he's humorous, and he said, so the meeting had transpired, so when he had concluded all the motions and everything else which had to go to COPE, board of directors, he came in and he said, Mr. President, I'm very pleased to let you know that I have done what you have told me to do. We have a society, we have a board of directors, and our society is Inuit Ulkanget Ingnung Nung. And Sam says, amen.
We're back with more of the ICS story. In this segment, we'll be looking at the newspaper, how it was published in the past, and the work that's going on today.
The founding members of the Inuvialuit Communication Society were Peter Green, Barbara Allen, Joseph Kittikudluk, Nellie Cornier, Bertram Pokiak, Mary Elias, John Madsen, and Tommy Smith. Tommy came into the studio to tell us why he became involved with ICS.
Our elders were dying off and the stories were being forgotten, and we thought of recording it. We can preserve it, pass it on to our younger generations, and we can learn from that too ourselves.
I really believe the more you know about each other, the more the strength gets built with that politically. Because if you're not in the mix, or you're not shown, and you're not able to give your views or portraying the cultural and traditional values of a group, you really have to question whether you can sustain yourself. And I really believe that more and more, as the needs of Aboriginal people are coming more and more out in the open. It's very, very important that the Inuvialuit of the Western Arctic keep up the momentum to keep up with the, the competition for recognition.
Keep our culture. Probably, I was hoping to be bringing it back through our language and through the elder stories of what they did and how they did things.
I don't think anybody really expected that ICS would take off as quickly or into as many different areas as it did. As I said, I was there alone, basically taking over a quarterly magazine, and it was one of those things where it was the right time and the right people were involved, and we happened to be there at a time when government was investing in communications for Aboriginal peoples. And it just took off, I think, way faster and bigger and better than anybody anticipated. We had a lot of, I'd say rather than struggles, maybe hurdles to get over in the first couple of years. We had to find somewhere to operate out of. We had to design television studios. We had to bring equipment in. We had to recruit people, we had to train people, we had to set up systems, financial systems and all the rest of it, deal with all the government bureaucracy around funding and reporting, trying to find people who could speak Inuvialuit, and there were people, and then there were some trainees who had problems, so we were trying to give people Inuvialuit lessons. And these were all part of the issues, trying to represent all of the communities, getting around to the different locations. Housing was a big issue in those years. We ended up acquiring leases on about, I think, up to 15 different housing units that we were managing because we wanted to be able to bring people in from other communities and for everybody to have somewhere to stay in Inuvik. So it was exciting, and we had lots of good people, lots of goodwill. And I think everybody kind of pulled together and came over a lot of these struggles in the early days. The magazine Inuvialuit had been published before by my predecessor, Larry Osgood, and it was a co-publication. It was a quarterly or 3 times a year magazine. People wanted more information and more news, so we I think fairly quickly added a little news bulletin. It was like a bi-weekly paragraph summaries of news headlines almost. But the goal was really to try and get a newspaper going, something that could be bi-weekly or at least monthly. And we set up a training program for 3 or 4 people, managed to find quarters in the old laundry building, and through a combination of training and people feeding in from the communities, and we gradually converted the magazine into a newspaper. We used to have to send everything down to Yellowknife to be put together, so we'd basically scrawl our instructions and send all the stories and information, and would all go on the plane down to Outcrop, and Outcrop would put it all together, send it back up for us to proof. Sometimes bits and pieces had fallen off the page in the meantime, so we never really knew until we got it back printed exactly what it was going to look like. But that was the start, and then we hired another full-time editor and gradually moved into proper quarters, got the right equipment so that we could do our own layout, and it went off from there.
In the past, what they would have done was they'd be cut and paste. They'd print out the articles, and then they'd run it through a machine called a waxer, which would put wax on the back of it. They'd apply it to a piece of paper, which was the size of the actual page that they were going to be printing. When that was done with every page, photos and articles alike, they would box it all up and send it to CanArctic Graphics in Yellowknife. And there, what they would do is they would take the galleys, that's what they're called, the big pieces of paper, and they'd make photo plates. They'd make plates which they would turn into negatives, which then they would put onto the printing presses, and that's what would be printed, and that's what you get your final result of the newspaper.
SUAANGAN will return after these messages for more on the ICS stories, so stay tuned to APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network. We're back with more of the ICS story. In this segment, we'll be looking at the newspaper, how it was published in the past, and the work that's going on today.
Today I do everything on computer. I have a layout program that I use, and it's got the exact pages and the size that I need. I lay everything out, the photos and the articles and stuff like that. When that's done, I take the file and I email it to Canada Graphics and Yellowknife. They're pretty much the only print shop in the north. And what they do is they have computers there. They do all the little, they make sure everything looks good, you know, that everything looks as it should. Then they can make the negatives straight from the computer copy instead, and then they just send it all to the press and do it that way. So it's a little, there's not as much involved, and there's no paper, and it's not as messy with wax and cutting and stuff like that. It's pretty much the same format it always was. Usually it runs between 12 and 16 pages. It's a lot of community events, things that have gone on recently, big events that are coming up in the future. We've done a lot of coverage in terms of the pipeline and what's going on, and the exploration for natural gas in the area. We've done a lot on, you know, the arts festival and annual events like that, special events that sometimes come up, Northern Games. We include a lot of elder stories. There's language pages which teach, you know, not only the younger readers, but, you know, everybody, you know, just a little bit more about the language, and gives them little exercises they can do to practice and things like that. Photo spreads on events. You know, pretty much as much as we can cover, being a publication that comes out only once every 2 months. So it's not as regular. It's not as regular as most newspapers would be. I think the paper's in a really good position to serve as an archive for the history and culture and traditions of the Delta. I think because we only come out once every 2 months, we really can't. We're a newspaper by appearance, but we can't really be a newspaper in reality. So I think certainly what I have planned for this coming year to celebrate the 20th anniversary is a look back into what has happened over the past 20 years, and look back and bring back, you know, old articles and old stories and stuff like that. Just focus on what has come, because I think it's quite impressive that, you know, this paper's been around for 20 years, and as it stands now, we're the only bilingual paper in the Northwest Territories in any language. So I think we have a good resource to connect people with what has come before, and keep that in mind as we go forward, and, you know, more of the culture and tradition becomes in danger, and language as well. I think the one thing that is important for people to realize is that there's only one person really running this paper. So it's just myself, and I'm based in Inuvik, and so the problem becomes I can't get out to all the communities, and I can't cover all the events, and because of financial restraints and stuff like that, there really isn't much of a budget for traveling and getting out and things like that. So if they could, you know, if there were events coming up that they felt were important enough to be covered, they could let me know, you know, call me at the office, fax me, email me, send me a letter, whatever. Just realize that, you know, it's a small staff, and you know, just keep supporting the paper and keep reading it, and you know, if you guys have questions or comments or things you'd like to see in the paper, you know, feel free to call me and let me know, because I may be running this paper, but it's everybody's paper. So it's very important to keep newspapers going, and the thing about this one is because it publishes in English and Inuvialuit, it's preserving the language and preserving the culture. And while we may have a small list of people we send it out to, there's a lot of people that are reading it, and a newspaper stays in a house for a long time. So I think by being here and helping it keep going, I'm doing my part to preserve the culture and tradition.
Television was chosen by most Inuvialuit partly because newspaper and radio had already been established in the Western Arctic. Funding for the society is provided by the Secretary of State, Canada, and at the time was a considerable amount.
At that time, we were looking at about $2.5 million a year. The initial startup costs were horrific. As you know, the hardware, the cameras, the edit suites, all of those hardware things, the software for the computers, everything, they cost an awful lot of money, and the startup costs were horrific. And after the initial investment of buying the cameras and all of the equipment, then we couldn't afford to put more into operations and salaries and benefits. It's the reason why we had such a large staff at that time.
Interviews were done in each hamlet in the Inuvialuit settlement region to find prospective trainees to fill 9 positions.
In 1978, the Anik B satellite is launched. Inuit organizations in the Eastern Arctic participate in pilot projects to test communication satellites and applications such as TV broadcasting, community communications, distance education, and telehealth.
The CRTC establishes the Committee on Extension of Service to the Northern and Remote Communities, the Theron Committee. The subsequent report stressed the urgent need for special measures to allow Aboriginal people to preserve their languages and foster their culture through various broadcasting initiatives.
In 1981, the CRTC licenses CANCOM to deliver a range of Southern programming into northern and remote communities. As part of the license approval, CANCOM is required to provide assistance to Northern Aboriginal broadcasters. In 1983, the Government of Canada announces the Northern Broadcasting Policy and the Northern Native Broadcast Access Program. Public funds are allocated for the production of radio and television programs by 13 Native communication societies across the North.
1992 marked the inaugural launch of TVNC.
In June of 1997, the TVNC Board of Directors votes to move forward towards the establishment of a national Aboriginal television network.
TVNC appears before the CRTC's hearings into third national networks and contends that Aboriginal broadcasting should be considered alongside English and French as vital broadcasting services. The CRTC grants a broadcast license to the Aboriginal People's Television Network. APTN's business plan was based on the CRTC granting the network a mandatory carriage status, which would require all cable companies to carry APTN as part of their basic service. While this was accomplished, it was not without opposition. September 1st, 1999, APTN begins broadcasting.
That was our program for this week. Thank you for watching SUAANGAN. I'm your host, Janine Blake, and I'll see you next week, where we'll bring you part 2 of the ICS story. Next week's program will focus more on the television side of ICS.